I'm Rolf Huber, the Managing Director of the Siemens Foundation. Hello, everybody. I have a little bit trouble seeing you all together, but I see that there are quite a number of people present already. So thank you very much for your time, for your effort of joining us today here in our webinar. You may ask, why is the Siemens Foundation active here? Well, we believe, or we are absolutely convinced, that sustainable transport and logistics and mobility are essential for any kind of development. So for us, it's then very natural to see that we are also convincing other organizations, other people, other actors. What we do as a foundation, we do technical testing, we are testing business models, and we are doing kind of seed funding. But what we also see, and that's why we are all here together, is that there is still a huge funding gap. It's early stage in this sector. And so I'm very excited and very curious on today's session when we are together seeing what are the opportunities to fill that funding gap, to support the sectors, to support the startups, to build a framework and an environment for this e-mobility sector to grow and to flourish. So I think today we see ideas around funding mechanisms, and we also are active in identifying startups or initiatives or entrepreneurs who are active in this field. And that's why we also are trying to filling that pipeline for investors or financial partners. And with this, I want to hand over to Mara. Mara Köberle is in the Siemens Foundation, the responsible manager for e-mobility activities. And she's running right now an innovation call on Sub-Saharan Africa, or electric mobility in Africa and for Africa. And I hand over to Mara to give us a little bit more on that, or at least tell us when is the deadline, when should the entrepreneurs and startups and initiatives in Africa go for it. So I hand over to Mara. And again, thank you and welcome.
Thanks a lot, Rolf. And I'm very happy to be here with you in our second edition of the Spotlight on E-Mobility session. And as Rolf said, we have a funding call open. I'll tell you a bit more about that later. But I'm actually excited that we have really interesting speakers today to focus on closing the financing gap for startups in East Africa and beyond. And before I'm going through the agenda today, I would like to give you some more information on today's session. So this is an interactive session. We have about half an hour of presentations, but then please feel free to ask questions. Please use the question and answer box on the bottom of the page that you can find. We will as well video record the session so that the presentations are available later for other users on YouTube and on our website. If you have any questions, like to me or to the participants, as said, we have the chat and we have the question box. Please, if you want your question to be considered in the question and answer later, please use the question box because it's a lot easier for us and for the speakers to organize the questions there. So, why are we focusing on finance? Well, sure, like if you ask any entrepreneur, they'll always tell you finance is the biggest obstacle. But sometimes we think as well that finance is a bit of a black box. So what influences investment perspectives, the investor's decision? And how is it actually be done from the entrepreneur side? That's why today we have two investors and one entrepreneur from India who was successful to share their insights with you. So first, we have three speakers today. I will always introduce the speaker before I give them the floor. And please, if there's any questions already, you can post them during the presentation or as well, of course, at the end during our question and answer session. So first, we have Sarbinder Singh from Partnership for Growth, who is the Director of Investments. He shares his expertise in managing investments and innovation, and he has a lot of experience in that. So he already managed a portfolio of over $1 billion in equity investment in the energy sector. Sarbinder will give insights today on delivering innovative business and financial solutions in the energy and utility business. As e-mobility is an important element of energy transition and will increase as well the demand for renewable energy, he will focus on the benefits of an integrated approach of energy and mobility. As Siemens Foundation, together with some startup partners, has a partnership with P4G, I'm especially happy that you're here with us today, Sarbinder. So please, the floor is yours. You can take it from here.
Thanks, Mara. Can you hear me? Sorry, I couldn't join for the practice session. So, let me share my screen. I've got a short presentation where I'll talk about some of the aspects which you alluded to. Is it coming okay on the screen?
Yes, maybe you can use the presenter's view, but I can see your
Okay, let me just do it. Just let me just try it once again. Is it better?
Yes, now it's perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mara, and thanks for a nice introduction. You know, I've been in this field for a few years and have a lot of experience in utility business. And what I see, what's happening right now, is a transition, and it's like transition in energy sector in a way that very soon will be off the oil and gas and the coal or all kind of fossil fuel generation, and move to more renewable, and transportation sector will become one of the big driver. So it's double whammy. So one, moving from fossil fuel to renewable, and second is increased demand for energy. I think that's what we are into, and all this innovative work, the investment in e-mobility, investment in other forms, whether it is green hydrogen, it's all going to make it happen, over the next decade or two. So, what I'll do is I'll talk about a bit of P4G, how we think and how we are going about it, and how we are supporting some of these startups and scale-ups who are involved in energy transition thematic area. And then also talk about some of my experience, in terms of more wearing my utility hat or utility experience hat, and say, yeah, I mean, if you integrate this way, it can accelerate your journey to achieve financial sustainability. So talking about P4G, we were set up in 2018 with support from Dutch and Danish government, and later on Korean government joined. We have operations in 12 countries. Or in Latin region, it's Mexico, Colombia, and Chile. In Africa, it's Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa. And Asia, it is Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. And aside from that, we do have Denmark, Netherlands, and Korea as our founding countries, supporting countries. And what exactly that means is that we have national platforms here, and national platform has representation from government, and it has representation from private sector. Effectively, what it does is it gives us an ecosystem, or it gives our partnerships an ecosystem where they get support from policy and regulation perspective, and also from market access perspective. So that's something uniquely we are doing. We also have organization partners. I've listed these organization partners here, which actually provide us different aspect of support in terms of knowledge partner, in terms of financing, and in terms of convening moments like WEF. So all those things bring together to create a very much I would call it a global ecosystem where the startups we engage with, the scale-ups we engage with, they are destined for success. And so far what we have done is around 50 partnerships we have funded, and out of those, some of the partnerships have started achieving financial closures, already $300 million invested, and huge impact on the ground. And most of these models, or the business models, are breakthrough business models. They're providing breakthrough solutions where things are not business as usual. This is what is our approach. We do fund startup and scale up at, it's not a huge funding we provide, but it is very much catalytic, and it's mostly in the co-investment form. And what our objective is to actually bridge the gap and work with partnerships to reach up to the stage where they can be financed by institutional investors. They could be still very much risky. They're still not defined as an asset class. So still there will be a blended finance required, but that's the objective we are working with. And we've got a very good network of development financial institution and other institutional investors who are very keen. As I said, like starting 3 years ago and reaching where we are, it's quite a bit of achievement, what we have done so far. This is the overall business model under which we work. And as I explained earlier, the national platform, policy and regulation, and also the market access, we do work with partnerships directly. Some of these innovative business model, when you're at a startup or scale-up level, you don't have all those skills which will, help you in achieving that success. And that extra skill, extra hand, extra advisory, is something, we provide through day-to-day interactions. And the real journey starts at the origination and co-creation itself. So it's not, we get an idea from somebody, we evaluate, and we just fund it. But we work at the origination stage with partnerships to see that, yes, this has all the ingredients to achieve success in, say, 18 to 24 months. Sometimes it takes more, but that kind of assessment can be done only when you work hand in hand, not as like a funder and then, somebody putting a proposal and making pitch. So that's not our approach. We do ask for pitch, but, it's more for understanding it better and seeing the opportunity for co-creation. And then we do have network convening. We've got a big event coming in Korea. It's a global event sponsored by the Korean government. So that's where, partnerships get a lot of highlight in terms of recognition globally. And at the end of the day, as I said earlier, we want to make sure that we are actually into preparing or structuring a deal flow where all these institutional investors can come and start investing in and making it big. And to some extent, we have started achieving that objective. The next one. So we've got, 5 SDG areas. I didn't talk about that earlier, but a couple of those SDG areas we have combined into what we call as now energy transition thematic area. And that's how we are taking a very integrated view rather than just, focusing on one SDG and one project, but more of like, what's the integrated view? If we talk about energy transition, everything comes under one. So whether we talk about hydrogen, whether we talk about, e-mobility, we see that as part of a single picture. And that makes us, our approach much more solid, and in terms of, level of effort reduced, because once you understand the dynamics at a macro level, you're able to deal with it better. And that's where, I'm very keen on looking at this e-mobility and green hydrogen from that perspective, that how does this model integrate with utility, and what is that we can extract from utility to make this or catalyze investment in this area. The great thing that utility brings is a creditworthiness. A lot of investment, if we talk about in green energy, has happened in utility sector, primarily renewable energy. But how can we translate some of that to support the transition to e-mobility, transition to green hydrogen? I think that's what we're working on. And accordingly, when we talk about bringing things together, we try to invest in partnerships in a way that they are addressing some part of that ecosystem to make it happen. So this is a brief list of some of the partnerships which we have invested in over the last 3 years. Africa Green Co is the one which has achieved their first financial closure and already working on the second financial closure. The other partnerships are in their journey to achieve that. Now talking about e-mobility in particular, and I can spend I don't know how much time, but this is where I've spent almost last 2 years and come down to some very narrow focus areas. Like what we see is that P4G really adds value and would like to work with the partnerships who are working in micro e-mobility, cargo EVs, and municipal e-buses. And here we're looking for mostly the innovative business model We're not looking for as much of a fundamental technology solutions, because that will always be driven by OEMs. And what we want to see is that how these things are structured in a way that the acceptance or deployment in market becomes very much, or is accelerated. It's not happening in like 10 buses or 22 wheelers and things like that, but 1,000 buses, 10,000 two-wheelers. So how we make it happen? So that's kind of a focus area when we talk about, investing in innovative business and finance model. And so here what we have learned so far is that integration is the key. You have to get the right stakeholders on the table. You have to have, and what the other thing is that to do any of these things, the starting point is always that, some kind of a pilot or demonstration deployment, which actually definitely requires an upfront capital. And that is where the confidence building happens. OEMs on their own, they are mostly investing in technology and integrating the technology and launching those vehicles, but making those vehicles compatible in the country, in the geography they're operating, is one of the key things. The other thing, if we look this e-mobility and if we actually divide this into different components, one is of course the vehicle itself. The second is battery. The third is charging infrastructure. And if we separate it out and then look from investment perspective, it becomes, somewhat much more doable. Because if you do packaging under a single head, the capital cost will be too much, and there will be challenges. There will be challenges in terms of economic viability. The question comes down to TCOs and stuff like that. But if it is like battery, risk and the capital is managed by who are very good at doing that, which is like there are business models talking about battery lease programs. The business model talking about the battery swapping. All those things are great. If you integrate that as part of your business model, we see that the viability improves. Viability improves because somebody is now taking care of battery risk, so you don't have to worry about e-buses running for 12 years on a battery pack and battery failing after 3 years, and then you're stuck with that kind of environment. So some of those things need to be well understood, and when you deploy it, the risk mitigated to the right party, and even the capital side of it mitigated to the right party if those services are available. And in some part of I would say some countries, this is now becoming kind of a separate business area. And this is where if you're working with e-mobility, we try to connect those dots also. We try to help those partnerships to get access to those kind of services as well. The other one is talking about electric utilities. That's like electric utility. I would say I come from that business, although like a lot of utilities world across are not doing well, but that's kind of like political part of it. But if you look at the structure of utilities, by the using term utility, it is supposed to make money, and most of the places utilities are regulated. Even if it is competitive, then it is PPAs. So what we have not been able to do, in my mind, is that when we move from this diesel buses to electric and battery vehicles, they actually help them in stabilizing the grid. Most of the vehicles will be charged at the time when the electricity is not required, and they will be using that charge when electricity is at peak. So what effectively it does is that it removes peaks and valleys from utility business, and all that utility planning is purely to address those peaks and valleys. So it effectively like what it does to utility business is it actually increases the asset utilization. But I have not seen a single case where increase in asset utilization or the utility asset utilization has come forward, and the economic surplus created from that has been shared with EVs. And that is something we need to work with, say, policymakers. We need to work with the utility to see that how that can happen. Because I did some case study in one particular jurisdiction. If the pricing of electricity is done appropriately, that economic surplus is shared, the TCO comes down and becomes very, very competitive with diesel buses. So that's the impact. And the next one is, like all kind of fiscal incentives required to, break that barrier, so that initial deployment can be competitive. They are replacing IC engines. And for that, some kind of you can't have 10,000 vehicles on day one, but if you can get some fiscal incentives at the beginning and have this initial deployment at scale, then of course it will be on self-supporting more than few years. So those are the kind of things, which I see that when we work at environmental factors, working with the government for the national platform, working with the partnership, working with other stakeholders, this is how, I see that electric mobility can, transition to electric mobility from ICE engines can be really, really accelerated. So in all, that's kind of my high level view. As I said, I'm happy to discuss more. I can talk more about it. We have funded quite a few partnerships, all over different countries where we have national platforms. Something about our board members. We've got representation from different, political level, senior officials, some business leaders in our board, and all those, provide support to our partnerships as required. And this is all about our teams. I think that's in brief. We talk about, e-mobility and how it can transform the market.
Great. Thanks, Sarbinder, for your high-level view. Really interesting to see, and I'm sure there will be questions for you in the discussion round. So if you have any questions now, please put them in the question box. We will ask Sarbinder later after all the presentations. So now we have Beatrice Muthoni. She's Business Development Manager in East Africa for InfraCo Africa. So Beatrice is a finance expert. She has 13 years experience developing and operating power infrastructure process across Africa. And in the last year, different investors in the mobility field for East Africa started to connect. And that's how Beatrice and I met in the investors talks. And I'm sure you're especially interested in her sharing in how InfraCo invested in EcoRent. Great. Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Please confirm you can see my screen properly.
Yes, very good.
All right. Thank you, Mara, and everyone else. My name is Beatrice Muthoni. I'm an engineer by profession, an electrical engineer by profession, business development manager for InfraCo Africa based in Nairobi. So I'll talk a little bit about InfraCo Africa, and then I'll go to the e-mobility sector. So InfraCo Africa is part of a bigger group called PIDG, Private Infrastructure Development Group. We have several companies under PIDG. So InfraCo Africa specifically is specialized in early stage project development, capital and expertise. So under PIDG, we have around 4 companies. We call ourselves sister companies. We have PIDG TA that gives grants to early stage development. So if you're working with a company and the company requires a little bit of grants to push it to a certain level or to cover a certain milestone, then we go to PIDG TA. And then we have InfraCo Africa, which jurisdiction is Africa, and then there's InfraCo Asia, whose jurisdiction is Asia. We have Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund, EAIF. This is our debt arm. So senior debt, mezzanine debts, they provide debt facilities. And then we have Guarantsco. Guarantsco offers credit solutions in local currency and development of local capital markets. So we are, the PIDG family is one large family that provides like a multitude of financing solutions. We are funded by several governments from Europe, UK, Netherlands, Switzerland, Australia, Sweden, Germany, and the IFC. So we have an array of funding. Specifically now to InfraCo Africa, we think that success requires 3 main ingredients: risk capital, patience, and expertise. And we at InfraCo Africa think we are unique in that we provide all those 3. So far, I think we have invested around $165 million across different businesses, across 23 projects and businesses. We work across multi-sectors. So apart from the e-mobility sector, which is actually a new sector for us, I'll talk about that much later when I explain about eCurrent. We support other sectors in the power and energy sector. We provide financing for mini grids, specifically in the power and energy sector. If you go to our website, a lot of the portfolio projects you'll see are power, large solar PV projects, hydro projects. So predominantly InfraCo Africa was known for such projects. However, we are diversifying a little bit. That's how we got into e-mobility. We're doing social infrastructure like student housing. I think it's in the media now that we're part of the consortium that funded ACON, the Kwetu brand for those who live in Nairobi, student accommodation. We also in agri infrastructure, water, sanitation and sewage, transport and logistics, and capital market development. So we offer a varied financing for multiple sectors. We come in early stage. So InfraCo Africa specifically takes stakeholding in the company. We are an equity investor, so we come in with equity, early stage, risky money when the project is still at very early stage. We take that risk so that our main aim as a company is to basically take some of that risk and put the project or the company. We mainly invest in projects, so I'll talk about a lot about projects, but we have evolved a bit. Most recently, we are finding ourselves investing more in project companies or local companies that have been set up for say e-mobility. So we come in early. We take a shareholding in the company early enough. So we basically reduce the risk, and we hope that by us coming in early, we improve the possibility of private investment coming into the project or the company. So we bring other things that we bring into the projects. We bring expertise. We make sure that the company or the project is developed in the highest standards. And most of our project criteria for investing, one of the biggest criteria for our investment, apart from commercial viability, is development impact. The projects that we invest in have to have impact to the communities. I will talk about that much later. So specifically for e-mobility, as I said earlier, we are new to this sector, so there's a lot we're also learning on the go, but we see these e-mobility in phases, and this does not really it's not just an e-mobility thing. Even other sectors like mini grids, we see phases in the investment process. So specifically for e-mobilities, there's the first phase, which is the proof of concept. And for each phase, a different blend of financing is required. So for the proof of concept, this is the very initial stage where the project partners are developing the technology with the OEMs, developing software, technology, building up the business model, as Sarbinder has talked about, creative business. We are seeing very, very creative business models out there, and it's quite encouraging. This is when a lot of project partners are going into research and development, what would work, what would not work. And for this particular phase, a lot of seed funding and grant funding comes into play, because the technology is not proven. Perhaps the software technology is not proven. The market, we have not tested the product for market fitness. So for the very initial proof of concept stage, you see seed and grant funding being the main players in terms of financing. Then we go to the pilot phase, which is where I think we are around at for e-mobility projects. A lot of the project partners are piloting. You see project partner has brought in 20 motorbikes, 30 e-mobility vehicles for taxis. You've brought rickshaws. So we're in the piloting phase, and in the piloting phase, this stage is very critical for two things mainly. You're testing operationability of your business model. Does it work? Where are the improvements? And the second thing that is very important in the pilot phase is the data collection. This is the key data that you will use to show financiers that we have 10 vehicles on the road. We have covered X amount of kilometers. We have 5 charging stations. We have swapped X amount of batteries. We have if it's a taxi like EcoRent, we have this amount of revenues going to the customers. So this is a test bench, and we see also at this point seed capital grant funding play a big role, because essentially when commercial investors come in, you want relatively proven test bed. However, it doesn't have to be proven 100%. So if you have a few vehicles on the road, it's a good start, because then you have data, you have you're testing your business model, you're testing your financial model, if the assumptions that you made in the financial model are realistic, or do we need to adjust this. A lot of times you find project partners, they have really ambitious assumptions on the ground. You know, Nairobi has 1 million motorbikes, and we want to revolutionize the motorbike, the border borders specifically. That's for carrying passengers, the passenger bikes, we call them border borders. We want to revolutionize the border industry. We can't do this overnight. So you have to test this. What are the customers saying? There's always a thin line between what the project partners are fronting and the reality on the market, on the ground. Then after all these, on the pilot phase, InfraCo Africa specifically would come at that stage, and we work with project partners. Just as Sarbinder said earlier, we work with the project partners. We are not financial sitting on one side and project partners sitting on the other side. So we work a lot with project partners on the pilot stage. We bring in now early stage equity in conjunction with the grant and the seed funding, so that we can now go to the scale-up phase. After scale-up, then once the technology is proven, the business model is proven, then we can scale up. And then I see the last phase as once a project partner is operational in Kenya, they perhaps want to scale up to other parts of East and South Africa, or even West African phase. What do we as investors look out for? I'm sure sometimes there's a lot of theory out there that the biggest challenge is finding investment. But I think sometimes it's quite simple. Investors are risk takers. We are taking a risk. We are taking a risk in this funding these projects. You're taking a risk funding your company. So there definitely have to be a few things that we are looking out for. I call them key drivers, but it's basically the risks that you're looking to mitigate. For us, one of the key things that we look out for is commercial viability. Commercial viability comes from the business model. What business model will you take up, or are you still looking at variety of business model? Which one works best? Are you flexible enough to move from one business model to another? So commercial viability of the projects or the companies is very, very key. With it comes affordability, which is a balance, because for these bikes or vehicles or rickshaws or boats to be purchased, they have to be affordable to the end user. What is the economic benefit to the customer, to the end customer? There has to be something that makes end clients choose your product vis-a-vis the other products in the market. So is your pricing market friendly? Does the product fit the market? So is your technology proven? I don't want to talk so much about technology, because this is really an OEM, as stated earlier. A lot of the technology on the vehicles themselves will be done by OEMs eventually, and that's why I'll talk about collaborations at the end. So technology, most of the time, there are firms out there that have been doing this forever. So it's very easy for them to transition from, say, fossil fuel bikes to electric bikes. So for technology of the fleet, that is an OEM role. However, the charging infrastructure, we've seen a lot of each project partner is putting up their charging infrastructure. So what does that mean at the end of, say, 4 or 5 years? Will we have 8 project partners with 8 different charging infrastructure, or are we going to see a merge and a collaboration and standardization actually in the charging infrastructure? So those are some of the things as investors we think about as we look at investments. Company valuation, I could take a whole day to talk about this, but project partners, the project partners are ambitious entrepreneurs, for sure, and we admire that about them. However, as you come in as an early investor, you're also taking a lot of risk with everything, the technology, the business model, the market. You're taking a lot of risk. So a lot of times you find that when you're coming in as an early investor, the valuation given to the companies or to the project sometimes is not proportional to what is on the ground or the amount of risk that you'll be taking. So company valuation is a key driver to our investment. If your project is valued so high, then investors find it difficult to come in, because we're also taking a big risk in investing in you. So impact to the communities, I have said this: what is the economic benefit to the end user customers? What is the development impact are you bringing? What is the carbon emissions? I think this has become very common for most investors. What value are you adding to the bigger society, not just necessarily to your immediate customers? What value are you adding to the country? What value are you adding to the whole value chain? So those are some of the things that we think about. And I think we have talked about improvements in early stage investments. Like we have talked about this several times. I'll just talk about like two main ones that I see in this sector, in the e-mobility sector. The first one is collaboration. There's a lot of room for collaboration. I will start with collaboration from the investor's side. As from my previous slide, there are different phases of investments in this sector. So I think there's a lot of room for grantors to work with, say, early equity investors and maybe early debt investors in putting out a solution out there for project partners to maybe use. These the e-mobility sector will not only be funded by grants. I don't think that is feasible, but grants are important. It cannot only be funded by equity, but equity is important, and eventually to not only be funded by debt, but debt is important. So what do? We have to collaborate. We have to have multi-stakeholder deals where grant funding is coming in, equity funding is coming in, debt funding is coming in. At the same time, we have to collaborate with the government. I think fiscal and non-fiscal government policies and regulations have to come in the collaboration, because I think for it to take root in the first place, we need some incentives as project partners. We need incentives from the government, and this can only come from the government. So it's good to work with the government. At the beginning, grant is very essential, and I find maybe this is not to the project partners. For you to get a grant, it's a really tedious and long process. You have to fill in a lot of forms. You have to. Mara just put out a call for applications. So it has to come from the project partners to fill in those applications, because a lot of these grants are helping a lot of project partners to move from the proof of concept stage to a pilot stage, which really attracts a lot of investors. Want warm customers, warm projects. So collaboration in financing is required, because blended finance is the only solution that will fund the whole ecosystem. And then patient debt, I think this is more on the innovating financing mechanisms. We need patient debt. Creative debt, debt that I understand there are debt facilities out there that are available that you only start paying back once your EBITDA hits positive. So this is the kind of solution that you're looking for project partners, because e-mobility is a scale game. You don't make money until you hit certain numbers. So for you to get to those numbers, you need capital. So it's a balance. So we need really innovative mechanisms and solutions. Investments in the value chain. I see a lot of collaboration. This marries the next point I want to make, consolidation and collaboration in the sector. I see a lot of project partners who wants to do the whole value chain. You want to provide the bike, you want to finance the bike, you want to provide the batteries, you want to provide the charging infrastructure, you want to provide everything in the value chain. I think eventually where I see the sector going is consolidation in the value chain, where like one facility, one project partner offers the battery leases, one project partner concentrates on the charging infrastructure, one project partner concentrates on the asset financing. And I think this is actually taking shape, because even as financiers, sometimes because of policies in financing, some of the financiers are not able to finance different seemingly competing entities. So sometimes I think there will be a breakout of the different value chains such that you can finance specific value chains. So I will just, eCurrent is the first investment we've made in the e-mobility space. It's an electric taxi hailing service in Kenya, in Nairobi. If you have not used it and you live in Nairobi, kindly install the application and use it. It's very efficient, it's quiet. InfraCo Africa invested 1 million euros to the company, to grow the company basically from a fleet of 30 to 100 and expand the required charging infrastructure across the city. For us to see this model as scalable, reliable, and eventually will attract private investors, because once you've hit 100 vehicles, then you have enough data, you have enough evidence that this works. It can be replicated elsewhere, either in other towns within Kenya or outside Kenya. And so to wrap it up, I just want to say InfraCo Africa is currently open and looking at other players in the sector for investments in the whole value chain. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Beatrice. And like, how encouraging to hear that you're actually looking for companies to invest in. So maybe interesting for some of our listeners today. So yeah, like investors. So we have, as our last speaker of today, we have Sameer Aggarwal, who is the founder and CEO of Revfin. So Sameer is based in New Delhi, and he shares with us his success story of the last 3 years. He's gonna talk about his journey of his startup, which is a fintech platform, investing in e-mobility users, and how he managed to attract investors. So Sameer, I'm really excited to hear from the other side. How did you manage to convince investors to invest in your startup? So the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Mara. Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can see my screen and hear me well.
Yes, very good.
Perfect. So first of all, I'm very happy to be speaking after both Sarbinder and Beatrice. It was very heartening to see their presentations. I think what they've brought is a very structured and formal way of raising funds for startups generally, but e-mobility startups in specifically. But as an entrepreneur, I know it's not very easy when you start up to raise funds. It's very difficult. There are a lot of practical challenges that you come across. And of course, as an entrepreneur, as you spend time building and scaling your company, you also learn a lot of things as you go along. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that I have faced, and I'm sure a lot of other entrepreneurs face as well, and some of the learnings that I've acquired over the last 2-3 years since I've been an entrepreneur. But before I do that, I'm just going to very quickly talk about Revfin. That's the startup that I founded almost 3 years back. We are an early stage digital lending platform. We finance individuals to buy electric vehicles all across India, in small towns in India. We've raised about $3 million so far in funding, and we've been operational for about 2.5 years. Okay. Now, raising money as an entrepreneur for your business, for a startup business, is very difficult. But if you are an entrepreneur working in the e-mobility or the electric mobility space, it's all the more difficult. It's difficult for a variety of reasons. First, the market, it's a new product. It's an untested product. The market is very, very unstructured. It is still developing. The scale is uncertain because nobody knows, where electric mobility is going to go. and the business models are untested, unproven. Also, the sort of big challenge I've found is that when we talk about electric mobility, in everybody's mind, they're thinking about all these fancy cars that will come and replace the cars that we drive today. But in reality, the products that are working in different geographies are very, very different. I'll give you an example of India. There are about 8,000 electric cars that are in use in India, and there are 2 million electric three-wheelers on roads, right? And that's a huge disparity. But the reality is that when you talk to people, people are not aware of the fact that there are actually so many electric vehicles in a country like India, because everywhere you read about cars, right? So you always read about a particular model launching, so on and so forth, and nobody knows what's happening on the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler space, especially with last mile connectivity. And when you talk to investors, apart from obviously there are certain investment houses or impact funds that are investing in this space, but generally when you talk to the wider investor community, there is a lot of confusion in terms of, is there a market out there? Is there a scale? What are the products? What products should you bet on? What are the business models that you need to bet on? Therefore, given the nature and the stage at which e-mobility is, raising funds becomes very, very challenging. And I've faced that, and I'm sure a lot of other entrepreneurs have faced that as well. So what does one do to actually overcome some of these challenges? And I'm just going to share some of the things that I've kind of learned over the last 2-3 years. The first thing that I realized is that you should start raising money early. What that means is basically, when I started off about 3 years back, there was a plan. I had a deck, looked nice and fancy. There was a very distinct or unique business model that I had in mind. And when I took it to investors, there was a lot of people who were happy to listen to the business plan, and a lot of people. It generated a lot of excitement, and people. And for me to raise the first round of funding was actually quite easy. Then as I started building the business and as we started operations, when we started going back to investors for fundraising, we faced certain difficulties. And the difficulty was that, once you start your operations, the focus shifts from the uniqueness or the differentiation of your business model to your day-to-day operations. And if your operations is not sufficiently scaled, it creates an issue, because then there's always a comparison with established business models. So I'll take an example. We are a lending company. Right? We lend in the EV space, and we do a lot of innovation in the way we do it. But whenever we approach investors, we are always compared with established lenders in different segments, right? So how much do you lend? What are your monthly disbursements? What is your delinquency rates, etc.? All these things are then compared to established business models. So therefore, from my perspective, it is always essential that you raise money early on the basis of your idea, and so that you have enough money to build sufficient scale to prove your business model. The second big learning is that it's always good to raise money from your friends and family first, and that's for multiple reasons. One is that it kind of binds you or commits you to your startup, right? In my case, my mother put all her life savings into my startup, right? And I know I can never let her down. And then therefore that brings an additional level of motivation, an additional level of commitment into the project. Equally, from an investor standpoint, when they see that your family and friends have been supportive and that they've taken the biggest risk by investing in the earliest stage of your venture, it actually looks quite good from their perspective as well. The third big sort of learning for me was that you should always raise 2 times of the funds that you think that you will need. While you're scaling a startup, you will always need money, and you will run out of money very, very quickly. And therefore, you should always overestimate the need for money rather than underestimate it. The fourth learning was raise small amounts in multiple steps. I think there are a lot of things over here. The first is that when as a startup you raise a lot of money, there's always a lot of wastage because you're not really sure where you want to spend money. So it's always good to be slightly short of money at every stage, so you can be very so you can question yourself sufficiently before spending money and only spend money on the things that you really need. It helps build very good business discipline. The other aspect linked to this is that there's always this constant sort of struggle between an entrepreneur and an investor in terms of what the valuation of your company should be, right? And if the amount of money that is being raised is not very high, then the valuation question becomes a little bit inconsequential, because ultimately for smaller amount of money, even if the valuation is low, the dilution is much lower. And that kind of gives you the opportunity to raise more money at a higher valuation at a later stage. And lastly, the fifth point, which is I believe the most difficult thing, is that when you go to raise money, especially for your second round, third round, etc., investors want to see what you've built, not only in terms of scale of your business, but they also want to see what is the team that you have, what is the skill of the team, what distribution have you built, what is your user base, etc. Right now, it's very difficult for an early stage startup to start thinking about these things because all these things require a lot of money. And in my case, certainly for the first 2 years, we kind of avoided building a very large team, thinking that let's raise money first and then build a team. But the realization is that without building a team, raising further money or further capital is going to be very, very difficult. So what we've started doing is we started building a team of professionals from the industry, from the lending industry, from the electric vehicle industry. We are building a team. We are preparing for the future so that we can display to the investors that now we are completely set up for scale. We've built a lot of distribution. We've built our distribution is perhaps about 20 to 30 times of what we can manage today, but at least we've built those pipelines of distribution. And all of those things are obviously increasing our cost, but also helping us showcase our organization to the external world as an organization that is professionally managed and ready for growth. So, so that's sort of the end to my very short presentation.
Thanks a lot, Sameer. That was really valuable insights. So, yes, so we are coming now to the question and answer round. So I can ask the other speakers to please switch on the camera. Thanks a lot. So do we have any? We had some question from the audience, and it was, I would like to start with Sarbinder. So it was actually tackling a bit the government involvement. So I would like to ask you from the high level perspectives, how do you think that governments, let's say maybe in Eastern Africa as well in other countries, can support the investment space for e-mobility?
See, the way I see it, it actually works backwards. And I think Beatrice mentioned very nicely that, when it goes to the user hand, whether it is viable and whether it is, makes, sense for them. And if there is a gap there in terms of viability, which can be addressed through policy initiative, then that is great. The other part of it is a regulatory. The third part is actually, as I said, so let me just touch upon fiscal part first. I mean, if there are some tax incentives, import duty reduction on all these things, that can really support deployment of e-mobility at scale. The second part is, of course, government declares at the political level that, they want to reduce emissions in transportation sector by this much by this time. That will give another trigger. The third one is like utility business. I mean, depending on how much government has a direct role to play in that, if it is, publicly managed or public sector managed utility business, then bringing some of those regulations, which actually, shares that economic surplus, which I talked about with e-mobility, that means, setting some special tariffs that takes care of that. This is, helping e-mobility will help in load balancing, e-mobility will help in, better asset utilization. So those things will help. But this has to come as at a right scale. So we're funding only one partnership in, say, Kenya. But if there are more and they can get together, then we definitely would be happy to work with and bring, at least our national platform into action to provide that kind of support.
Thanks a lot. So yeah, Beatrice touched as well on collaboration and the importance of it. So I think especially your points where you kind of sketched out what elements are important for you as an investor were really interesting for the audience. Is there one common mistake you'd say that many startups or companies looking for funding are doing repeatedly that come over your daily practice?
Maybe I would say, yes. There's some very common mistakes. I think the top on my list, I think this would differ from investor to investor. Top of my list is documentation. For an investor, we rely on data and documentation. Sometimes you have done so much work, but you don't have anything to show of it. So it's critical to keep proper documentation. If you have even just company registration documentation, that is like the first key entry to anyone, any investor, to make sure that you're legally you're legally doing business in the country. So documentation for me is key. So we struggle a lot with documentation. We have a list of documents that we need from investees, but a lot of them sometimes don't have the requisite documentation.
Thanks for that. So Sameer, would you agree? I actually thought your point of raising from family to increase pressure was really interesting. I didn't hear that like that before. So what would you say, like documentation, and then like what are there any tips or anything you would have liked to know already when you started Revfin 2.5 years ago?
So I mean, personally, documentation is not an issue. I'm quite anal about, maintaining everything properly in folders, etc. And I think it's very crucial to do that as well, because, you realize that you're working on so many things at the same time, right? And if you don't kind of structure, put a proper structure to things, it becomes very difficult to, keep pace with things. But I think, otherwise, barring that, I think from a, I don't know. I mean, I think it's, I just say one thing, somebody once said to me, just a learning for an entrepreneur that, when you look forward, you see a wall. Whenever entrepreneurs see forward, they see a wall. And the thing is not to look at the wall and stop, but actually to walk and reach the wall, because there's always a turning somewhere next to the wall, right? And I think my experience has been that that's always the case. So basically persevere. I would say that's sort of my sort of biggest learning.
Thanks for that. So because we're already unfortunately coming to the end of time, I would like to give each one of the speakers like kind of one sentence or one maybe tip or learning that you would like to bring forward. And then like if you want to connect, we'll send you some presentations and the recording. So please get in touch so we can maybe engage further. So Sarbinder, what would you say? What would be like your top takeaway or your top tip that you would like to share with the audience today?
One thing I'll say very straightforward is that partnership with multiple stakeholders and bringing them in is one of the recipe for success. And that's where in the right business model, you bring all the stakeholders in, the success will be warranted.
Beatrice, how about you?
Sarbinder just took the words out of my mouth. I would say it in a different way. Innovative solutions and collaboration. All the stakeholders need to think out of the box, or don't have a box anyway. So collaboration and partnerships are key.
Sameer, what would you say?
All right. So from my perspective, I think e-mobility is the future. There's a lot of scale in e-mobility. I know a lot of people don't see it that way at the moment, but one needs to stay put in this space. The next 4-5 years is going to belong to this. Is going to belong to e-mobility. So all the entrepreneurs need to stick in there. And I also want to just echo the views of both Beatrice and Sarbinder. I think partnerships are very, very crucial. Right? You cannot a new setup like e-mobility, you cannot run on your own. You need partnerships not just for scale, but also for risk mitigation.
Thanks a lot. So I think we're quite clear that we need partnerships. Rolf, what would you say? Do you join in the choir?
No, partnership is just perfect. I mean, it all comes together to have the right partners and the motivated partner. And for me as the one who is closing now those rounds of questions, it's the easy part because I already saw very, very great partners here on the screen the last 1 hour. And unfortunately, I couldn't hear much from the audience because of what I saw in the chat. There are also very interesting organization people out there. So my part would be, let's continue talking about collaboration and working together, also with those who didn't have a voice today. But this is a series of webinars, so it's just one next step. And I thank Mara and all the participants for their engaged discussion and insights. That was again very helpful. I learned something new again and again and again. And with each partner, it should continue. So thank you very, very much.
Yes, thanks a lot, Rolf. And as promised, so please get in touch. We do have a mailing list as well. And as Beatrice or as Rolf presented in the beginning, we currently do have a small grant funding call open for the pre-seed sector. So if you're e-mobility startup registered in Sub-Saharan Africa, please get in touch, apply. You can find the application details as well on the website. We close the call on 30th of April. It's small tickets between 10,000 and 50,000 euros. And please get in touch if you want to discuss further. We are always there and we're happy to help the sector grow. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mara. Thanks all.